Well, as we were talking about the Richard Sherman story yesterday, we played the 911 call from his wife to police, which is where this whole incident started. And I just got overwhelmed. People stopped focusing on the Richard Sherman part of the story, and they started focusing on the 911 call receiver and thought that this person was very unprofessional. And I don't know anything about that world. I don't know what they're trained to do. I don't know how they're supposed to handle calls, but I know somebody who does know that stuff. John Urquhart, former King County Sheriff. He joins us here on the Dori Monson Show. Sheriff, always good to talk with you, sir.
Thanks, Dori. Glad to be here.
A couple of things. Before I get to the 911 caller, I know that you had a chance to listen to these calls, and just from a police perspective, this was a pretty serious incident, wasn't it?
Well, it was a very serious incident, as it turned out. But, of course, the call receiver, when that first call came in from the wife, she doesn't know that. She doesn't know what's going on, doesn't know how serious it is, and it certainly could have been much more serious. So there's certain information that she has to get, and it's absolutely critical that she gets that information quickly. The problem is what she wants to get and what the person who's calling in this case, Richard Sherman's wife, sometimes those things diverge. And the caller, who was obviously very, very upset, understandably, wants to talk about one thing, and the call receiver wants to get information on something else. And that means that the call receiver has to take control of that situation. Okay. And oftentimes, quite frankly, they come across as rude.
Now, as I understand it, there are two levels of people in the 911 call center. The call receiver, who's the person we hear on this 911 tape, and then the dispatcher. The dispatcher communicates with the police who are being sent out. The call receiver is just there to gather information, put it in the system, send it to the dispatcher who will dispatch the cops. Is that all correct?
That's absolutely correct. They're sitting in fairly close together, but on separate sides of the room, basically. And they communicate back and forth via the computer.
Okay, let me play a couple of these clips for you, because these are the ones that seem to set off my listeners the most.
911, what are you reporting?
I need officers to my house now. My husband is drunk and threatening to kill himself.
Stop. What's the address? Are there any weapons? Stop.
No, there's no gun. I'm saying there are no weapons, ma'am. There are no weapons.
You need to stop interrupting me so I can get the information I need to get officers expedited.
I need officers here now.
Okay, so what I'm hearing, John, from my listeners is here's a woman in crisis, and she received no compassion on the other end. What do you say to that?
I think that's probably true. There was no compassion because of the urgent need to get information. And what she was trying to do is just get Richard Sherman's wife to stop, take a breath, and listen and get that key information out. The key information was, hey, what's your address? Where are you? Because if I don't have your address, I can't help you. And number two, are there any weapons there so she can protect the officers, the deputies that are responding? That's absolutely critical. You really don't have time to stop, and I guess I would call it hand-holding. As terrible as that sounds, you have to get the information.
No, that does not sound terrible. And, the reason I didn't, I said I understand how this sounds, but I also understand I don't know what that job is. I don't know what they're trained to do, and that's why I wanted to get your insight and expertise on this. Okay, here's one other clip of that call.
Okay, and how much has he had to drink tonight?
2 bottles.
2 bottles of what?
Now, a vodka and Hennessy.
Okay, hard alcohol.
It's alcohol. He's intoxicated.
Okay, sir. I'm only going to talk to one person, so please put the phone down
so
and talk to Ashley.
Okay, is the sheriff on the way?
Okay, listen, it's over on dispatch, okay? Talking to me is not going to slow anything else down.
She keeps saying, what you tell me is not going to slow help down. But I'm guessing Richard Sherman's wife isn't even hearing this at this point because she's in crisis. I mean, there are just two such divergent mindsets at play right now. One person has to gather info as part of her job. The other person is, like I said earlier, in crisis. And those two don't meld very well together.
That's exactly right. It's very, very difficult. And as we, as in the cold light of day, as third parties, we listen to this, and it's sometimes difficult to understand. When I first heard your call, when you called me to get some information, I thought, oh boy, here we go. And then I listened to the call, and I had no problem with that whatsoever, because I know what goes on. I've been there. I've been on both sides. So it's a little different viewpoint, I guess.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to get an expert opinion. All right, here's one more.
I cut the gate. We live behind it. It's Richard Sherman. Like, ma'am, this is like a emergency. I need officers here
listen
now.
to me. I'm handling this. You need to stop telling me that.
I'll tell you, but what I
not going to slow help down.
He got out. He just got out the
me
gate.
is not going to slow help down.
Okay, why wouldn't the call receiver, when the wife says, "Are the police on the way?" Why wouldn't she just say, "Yes, they are"? I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, I think she probably should have, or that certainly would have helped. She didn't happen to in this situation, but kind of, oh well. Nobody's perfect. A lot going on. And remember, all this information is coming in, and it's not like she's sitting there waiting for the call receiver, sitting there waiting for the call to end. She is typing continuously. She is sending information to the dispatcher, basically simultaneously as she's talking on the phone, and the dispatcher then has already dispatched the deputies to this whatever address she had, even without all the information yet.
Right. And I absolutely understand when the uncle jumped on the call and the call receiver said, "I only talk to one person at a time." That would be chaos if that wasn't an absolute policy, because you'd be dealing with that in most calls, I'm guessing.
Sure. And it was already chaos. Let's face it, it was already chaos. The last thing you need is another person in there chiming in.
So what's the main message? Having heard this from a trained expert's perspective, what's the main message that my listeners should take away from all of this?
Well, I it doesn't really matter what I'm going to say, because if you're in a crisis situation and you're calling 911, it's hard to do what I'm going to tell you to do. What I'm going to say is take a deep breath, slow down, and just listen to what the call receiver asks you, and give her or him that information. Just slow down. But I understand how difficult it is. Dori, let me say one more thing.
Yeah.
I worked patrol for God knows how many years, a long, long time. And you know how cops complain. And we sit around and we complain. And one of the things we complained about most was the communication center, because we always thought they didn't get what our job was, and we certainly didn't understand it. It went on and on and on. And then I went in as part of my training, and I sat for 8 hours with a call receiver and a dispatcher. And I got to tell you, I walked away from that with a whole new respect for what they do. As far as I'm concerned, if you look at a police department, those two jobs are the toughest jobs, day in and day out. Much more difficult than what a patrol officer, what a police officer does. It's so difficult because of the calls they get, what they have to deal with on the phone. Remember, they're the first person talking to some, God knows what it could be, a mass shooting or a DV like this. They have a fantastically tough job, and they do a great job of it. And I think this call receiver, both of them, the one that took the uncle's call a little bit later, they did a great job.
You see, I really understand what you're saying, because cops, as as mistreated as they've been around here the last couple of years, cops still do have positive encounters, and a lot of days where they talk to people in a friendly way and are appreciated. These call center people, they know when they roll out of bed in the morning, they are, for 8 straight hours, going to talk to people who are probably in the midst of the worst crisis of their life. And that has to be draining. It has to be a little bit soul-sucking. And I certainly was much more inclined to want to extend grace to this person than what I think most people's visceral reaction was.
They pick up the phone, and they don't know if it's someone calling about an abandoned vehicle or they've walked in on a dead child. They don't know what's going to be on the other end of that call. Exceedingly difficult, and they certainly do the best they can, and I think they do a great job, and I think this particular call receiver did just fine. I had no complaints whatsoever.
All right. That's a great perspective. John Urquhart, former King County Sheriff. John, always appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dori.
Up next in the big lead,